Story 1. The man who owned the local chip shop was a pillar of the community. He did wonderful charitable work and let pensioners have bags of chips for 10 pence. However, he kidnapped a teenage girl and kept her as a sex slave in the back of a van until she was discovered 2 weeks later. Story 2. She started dating a very strange man, and they decided to kill her surviving parent. I cannot remember if it was her mother or father, but I believe it was her father. They were likely under the influence of drugs and committed the act in an extremely violent manner. The morning after the murder, they left the front door of the house open. The family dog was found wandering around the cul-de-sac, covered in the owner's blood. Story 3. Back in the 1970s, someone was harassing my great-aunt, who never married and lived alone. A man would come in the middle of the night, beat on the doors and windows, and scream sexual things at her. She was scared, so my grandfather stayed the night with her for a few days until it happened again. When the pounding started, my grandfather threw the door open. The man retreated into the darkness but said he had a gun. My grandfather, who also had a gun, shot what he assumed was the ground in front of the man. Either the pellets deflected or he actually shot the man in the legs. We will never know. The man lived, and here is the twist. It was the sheriff. He was married but would get drunk and harass women in the middle of the night. In a small town, it was easy to assume he was just another bad person, but everyone back then loved him. My grandfather ended up being hated by the entire community, except by the few women the sheriff was bothering. To this day, people with our last name are not well liked there. Most do not remember why, but that is how small towns operate. Story 4. A friend's father used to volunteer at our school. He was the only man there but was kind to everyone and regularly spent time with the mothers helping with activities for the children, as our school required parents to contribute a set amount of time. It was a very small and close-knit community in a rural area. I remember playing with his daughter, one of my friends, on a Friday and then saying goodbye as her mother came to pick her up. On Monday, I found out that he had shot my friend and her sister before turning the gun on himself in a murder-suicide. Story 5. A man was paraded around town for 3 weeks, his 3 children in tow, pleading for his missing wife to return. It turned out he had already killed her and buried her in the basement. Story 6. A woman died during coronavirus disease 2019, who everyone thought had a Doctor of Philosophy degree in criminal justice. It turns out she was wanted for murder under her real name and had done many things under an assumed name, including buying a house. She told many stories to different people. Story 7. Beat his wife severely with a knife sharpener after she asked for a divorce. She lost a few fingers trying to defend herself. They were both teachers at different schools in the area. My brother and I both had him as a teacher for several years in high school. I went on overnight field trips with him. I never would have guessed he was capable of that. Last I heard, he was reaching out to former students to write letters for his parole hearings. Story 8. Not really a person, but a couple of people owning a business. There was a Lego store in my hometown that had been around for years. They were caught for paying people to steal Lego sets from local stores like Walmart and Fred Meyer. When they were caught, they had over 4,000 stolen Lego sets worth over $200,000. Police caught them after receiving a tip from someone who had stolen for them and had not been paid what was promised. When they staked out the location, they saw several suspicious people entering with Lego sets and leaving empty-handed. They questioned some of them, and they were willing to tell the police that they had stolen the Lego sets and been underpaid. Story 9. My high school had exactly one mature pine tree in the desert southwest state, which the stoners had long claimed as their own, calling it the freak tree. Shade was in short supply on campus, and there were not many cool places to hang out. A couple of days before graduation, someone snuck onto campus at night and cut it down. Reactions ranged from amusement to outrage, with bewilderment and disappointment being the consensus for most. A substantial reward was offered, but nobody ever got caught. I found out many years later that it was the student body president, a total goody-two-shoes honor student and Eagle Scout, pretty much the last person anyone would expect. He was very drunk, used a handsaw, and still had bandaged blisters on both hands at graduation, but he told everyone he had burned them in an accident. Story 10. Not sure if you would consider him innocent since there were always rumors about him, but my town's former chief deputy was arrested a few weeks ago. Apparently, he was involved in a large drug operation and was supplying the criminals with information that the police had so they would not get caught. In return, he was receiving $10,000 a month. I live in a small city of about 13,000 people, the majority being farmers, but this is the kind of situation you see on law enforcement television shows. Now people are wondering if he was paid off in many of his cases, including one involving a woman who has been missing for over 30 years. Story 11. Robbed a gas station with a fake gun, an airsoft gun, and he was shot by police as he walked out the front door. Heroin will ruin your life and does not care if you are the nicest, most innocent person in town. Story 12. Innocent to adults, not to the kids who caught him. Mr. H was the middle school computer science teacher from the 1990s to 2015. All the adults thought he was a normal man with a loving wife. Not only did he watch pornography on the clock with kids in the classroom, he was actively stalking several girls online and trying to groom them. He knew the urban myths and used them to gain the trust of female students. Mr. H was also a white knight predator, pretending to protect his victims from online predators and presenting himself as a safe resource to those in trouble. Mr. H was in my YouTube comments in 2008 and pretended not to know me. He called out the more obvious pedophiles and pretended to be my friend. He overwhelmed me with gifts as he tried to groom me. I sought him out when I was uncomfortable with what I was experiencing, not realizing the person I was scared of was actually him. I deleted all of my social media accounts when letters arrived at my house, and I never addressed what happened. In 2015, Mr. H was arrested for child sexual abuse and possession of child pornography. His aliases were revealed, and that is when I realized my computer science teacher had been grooming me and lying to me when I was 11 years old. All the adults were shocked. Nobody suspected this. But looking back, the signs were there. Story 13. My former high school marching band director was arrested for possessing 2,000 images and videos of child pornography. I was in the marching band when he was the director, so this was a horrible shock. Story 14. She revealed on a drunken night that she has a kink for dating married men, and then leaving them once the wife finds out, so the husband can get in trouble. She admitted to planting clues to help the wives find out faster. I haven't looked at this innocent girl the same since. Story 15. Our local sheriff in a rural area was committed to fighting drugs in our county. During election time, a local drug dealer wanted him removed and devised a scheme to have him killed. He conspired with a deputy sheriff who was also trying to get elected as sheriff to hire a young man who bought drugs from him to kill the sheriff. A cookout fundraiser took place at the local volunteer fire department a few months before the elections, where all candidates running for office came to engage with the community. The sheriff was there, while the shooter was hidden in the woods on a hill above. He shot and killed the sheriff on the spot in front of a couple hundred people. He was caught by law enforcement and confessed to the entire scheme. He was sent to prison along with the deputy and the drug dealer. The shooter was from our community and about 10 years younger than me. He was friends with our neighbor's child during their youth and often stayed overnight at their home. Story 16. Not my town, but a lodge I worked at in a small town in North Carolina had a man who was very friendly and well-liked. He brought in a lot of repeat business because of his demeanor. It turned out he was on the run for child abuse and illegal activities involving children and was living there under an assumed name. Somehow, he got word that the federal authorities were onto him. He took his own life by filling a backpack with rocks, walking into the river in town, and shooting himself. One day, while I was working, a woman came in asking for Mike. My boss said, "Let's take a walk." When they returned, she was crying, got into her car, and drove off. Story 17. I worked with an Englishman in France a few years ago. He was a lovely man, very relaxed. He once mentioned that he received money every month from the government in the United Kingdom because of mental health problems. He did not expand on this. About a year later, I found out that he had returned to the United Kingdom and had a complete mental breakdown. He began to believe that he was in some kind of Grand Theft Auto-style video game and that his mission was to save children who had been kidnapped. He decided that two elderly brothers in their 80s had kidnapped the children, so he beat them to death and then beat another man, also in his 80s, to death. He is now confined in a secure unit, and I cannot imagine him ever being released. Story 18. The man was a local hero because he chased down a murderer after the man killed a local woman and led the police to him. He received an award from the city. A couple of years later, he was found with a lot of child sexual abuse material. He was sent to prison. Story 19. Literally robbed a bank. I was best friends with his younger sister. Their mother was the band director at a school in town. They were known for being very studious and quiet. It was a couple of years after I had left town, and we had fallen out of touch, but it was still shocking. Story 20. He molested his stepdaughter, who was about 14 years old. I was told that he eventually admitted to committing the crime and that he had planned to run away to Mexico with the girl if he had not been caught. He is in prison. Story 21. Involved in a significant amount of Medicare fraud. He received a tip that he was under investigation. He murdered his wife and then killed himself. Story 22. Not a crime. The male choir teacher was caught making out in a supply closet with a female math teacher. This was only shocking because everyone had assumed he was gay before this. Story 23. I had a girl who was my best friend in second grade. Let's call her Molly. She was so nice and bubbly. We had sleepovers at her house and hung out all the time. The next year, I moved to a different school, and a couple of years later, she moved to a different town in the same state. We followed each other on social media, and right out of high school, around 18 years old, she posted about having a child. The next year, she had another. The father was never mentioned, but she always had these adorable curated photo shoots, and I was happy for her. A year or so passed, and I received a message from a girl I had been friends with since elementary school but hadn't talked to recently. I opened it, and it was a link to an article from our local small-town newspaper. The front page showed Molly's mugshot. She was arrested for sexual assault of a minor in the town where she lived. She had assaulted a child in foster care. My jaw dropped for a full minute. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around how evil she turned out to be. I feel sick for her children and that poor boy. Story 24. My high school principal was super sweet and spunky, and everyone loved her. She was also married. Until a couple of seniors accessed her voicemail, back when everyone had the same voicemail code unless they changed it, and heard messages from the married middle school principal. They told everyone. In a small town, everyone found out. It was a big deal. Story 25. Murdered people for their social security checks and buried them in the front yard, the people, not the checks. Sacramento. Story 26. In my high school, there was a goody two-shoes kid who wanted to be a police officer. He even did an internship with the local police station. He always followed the rules and reported other kids for smoking marijuana because he thought drugs were evil. A few years after graduating, he went to prison for sexually abusing a toddler. I personally always thought he was a terrible person, but most people were shocked. Story 27. We had a couple who were originally Vista workers, similar to the Peace Corps but for domestically disadvantaged areas like Appalachia. The husband and wife were very active in the church and actually sang a song together the morning before a random intruder broke in and killed the wife by hitting her dozens of times with a copper pipe filled with rocks. This story was shocking even for the 1990s in Kentucky. The police searched the husband's car and found the bloody murder weapon. His defense at trial was that he took the murder weapon and hid it in his car because he was so enraged that his wife had been killed that he wanted to kill the intruder with the same weapon. There was still a small group of people who believed this, but none of them were on the jury, and the man was sentenced to life in prison. Story 28. A father and husband died of kidney disease, so she set up a fundraiser for the family and then stole all the money that was raised, approximately $14,000. She was publicly arrested. Story 29. A local veterinarian, known for supporting charities and saving family pets, had an affair with a married employee. After she ended the relationship, he stalked and murdered her husband. Story 30. My church-going religious mother, who would never say a curse word or drink alcohol, was on trial for murder when she was 19. I found out last year. To say I am completely shocked is an understatement. There is also other family drama I will not get into. I remember coming across the newspaper article and thinking, no way, this can't be her. As I skimmed the article, little details popped out, like how she was pregnant with a baby due in June. My half-brother was born in June. She was found not guilty. If she had been found guilty, my siblings and I would not be here today. It blows my mind. She does not know that I know this. Mentally, it affects me every single day. Story 31. My high school biology teacher confiscated a student's phone during class because he was using it and texted a naked picture of that student's girlfriend to himself, then uploaded it to a pornography website. He was eventually tracked back to him and he was fired. This happened about a year after I graduated. I have no information about whether he was criminally charged or what happened afterward. He was an unpleasant person, and his actions did not surprise me, but I was shocked by the sheer stupidity of it. Story 32. A very sweet, shy, science-oriented, germophobic girl. One day, she had a suitcase with her and revealed that it was where she stored her experimental psychedelics, as well as many other hard drugs. Story 33. An innocent fan of Japanese animation and culture moves to Japan and becomes a popular adult film performer. I feel that providing more details might compromise privacy. Story 34. Former police officer who murdered a policeman's daughter and fiancé, along with 2 other policemen, after being terminated. The incident triggered a large multi-day manhunt that resulted in the closure of a mountain park. Story 35. My high school math teacher of 2 years, junior and senior, had worked at the school since it was built in the 1990s. He was known to be very passionate about teaching math. I remembered him fondly because I struggled, but he was patient with me and even danced around and clapped when I figured things out on my own. He had also been the coach of the girls' volleyball team for years. A year after I graduated, he was exposed for selling alcohol to minors and possessing inappropriate pictures he had taken of his team without their knowledge. Despite the evidence, many parents supported him, but he ultimately lost his job. I am not sure what happened afterward, as my town has removed all information about it online, which is typical for handling scandalous events. Story 36. I lived in a small apartment building on the same floor as a middle-aged man. He was usually well-dressed and greeted me in a calm, genuine way when I saw him in the elevator or in the garage, where he parked next to my car. One night, I got into the elevator and he was there with a woman. They had just come back from a night out together. He introduced her, and I was happy he seemed to have found someone nice. About a week later, I was getting into my car for my morning commute and saw the man rifling through his trunk, looking agitated. I said hi, but he didn't respond, which was out of character. Later that day, I was home from work when I got a knock on my door. A couple of police officers asked if I had seen the man, and I told them I had seen him that morning. It turned out that the night before, he had stabbed the woman in her apartment more than 30 times. As she lay dying, she wrote the man's initials in her own blood. After the murder, he came home, cleaned himself up, and went to work in the morning. That morning, I had seen him in the parking garage. When the police came to my door, they already had him in custody, having arrested him at work. They were asking neighbors about his actions after the murder, coming home, cleaning up, and going to work. I was horrified and shocked. I never would have expected this from him given his demeanor and appearance. He was held in jail awaiting trial. Several articles were written about the case. Eventually, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. At some point, an auction company seized his apartment and held a day where people could bid on the contents. It was strange. An article I read described how the woman's family had concerns about the man she was dating due to aggressive behavior he exhibited. Sadly, their intuition was correct. She had children from a previous marriage. It was heartbreaking to imagine the loss her family experienced. Summary: I met the woman my neighbor was dating in the building's elevator. A week later, he murdered her, and she wrote his initials in her blood before dying. Story 37. A cheerleader and prom queen married the son of the village justice, had 3 children, became the village clerk, stole $70,000, was caught during a state audit, and went to prison for 6 months. She got out, Everyone seemingly treats her as if nothing ever happened. Story 38. I grew up with a girl and had a good friendship with her. She was raised Mormon and got married right after high school. She moved to Washington, became a teacher, and had an inappropriate relationship with her 17-year-old student in her home while her husband was away. She received a minor punishment and now sells clay jewelry. Story 39. The very friendly and much beloved married elementary school principal was caught soliciting an adult male prostitute during a sting. He lost his job. His wife did not divorce him. They moved out of town immediately. Story 40. I slept with a man who later murdered his fiancée, with whom he had 2 children. I also attended high school and was casually friends with a girl who later neglected her baby, which died. She reportedly left the baby alone in a hot bedroom during the summer, did not feed it, and even refused help from neighbors who offered to assist. Story 41. Small town, farm town, USA. A girl in my high school senior class, an all-around good student, in the running to be valedictorian, sports star in soccer, basketball, and track, and a favorite of all the teachers. Wealthy family, all of that. Well, about 3 weeks before we were all set to graduate, she and her older brother went around and held up several gas stations at gunpoint. I think they hit 2 locations. They did not shoot anyone, just threatened the clerks with a pistol and demanded money. When they got to the 3rd gas station, the police were already alerted, and they were caught in the middle of the robbery. At some point, one of them fired the gun at the police. I do not remember all the charges or the final sentencing. I am sure that because she was still in high school, they went easier on her, but yeah, needless to say, she missed graduation. Yes, my hometown of roughly 7,000 people was scandalized. Story 42. Suburban town. One of those generational families in town. The home had a methamphetamine and more bust. The adult son was arrested with millions in product and cash. It made the national news. Story 43. She attempted to harm the father of her child from a one-night stand. She was the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Story 44. When I was in high school, the quarterback of our football team my senior year, a fellow classmate, was one of the sweetest guys in the class. Kind to literally everyone, he made people feel included, especially those who were not popular. Overall, he was a great guy. A few years later, we had both gone to different colleges. He went somewhere in the Midwest to play football. During our junior year of college, I heard from a close friend that he was back in our hometown after being found strung out on methamphetamine and many painkillers in the middle of the night, firing a shotgun on someone's farm property. He had done so many drugs that he suffered advanced brain damage. He had to relearn some motor skills and, as far as I know, is still unable to work or do much independently. He has moved back in with his parents and will be living like that for the foreseeable future. I graduated about 4 years ago, so this has been approximately 5 years for him. It is a very sad story and makes me wonder if there was something behind his friendly persona in high school. Story 45. A girl who graduated high school a year before me won our town's pageant. The pageant was also affiliated with Miss America at the time, so it was a big deal. She was a star athlete and an excellent student. She was forced to resign as the winner because she had been working a side job where she wrestled in lingerie. Videos of this were sold online, which went against the Miss America brand's morality clause. Story 46. There was a massive minor sex trafficking ring in my town. A lot of people were involved. One of them was a high school friend of mine. One of the victims was my sister. Here is the key point. The investigation was stalled 3 times because it was discovered that the lead investigators were also involved. Story 47. A girl I went to high school with was caught sexually abusing mentally disabled elderly people in the home where she worked as a certified nursing assistant. She ended her own life shortly after it came to light. It was a huge shock because she was strange but kind. Story 48. A well-known male teacher and assistant principal was found beaten to death at a state park. It was discovered that he was meeting young men for sex, and one of them reacted violently. Story 49. The nicest man in the world lived down the street from me growing up. He was truly warm and friendly. Our claim to fame was that neighborhood kids would find old fishing lures on the beach, and he would buy them from us. Several years later, He planned the murder of his business partner and tried to make it look like a car accident but botched it badly. He went to prison and was stabbed a while later, dying in prison. It was shocking for our small Midwest town. Story 50. My 8th grade science teacher was arrested for using students to produce illegal material. One of the students was a neighbor and said it deeply affected him. The teacher served his sentence, was released, and now has a Facebook account with people interacting with him. I had this teacher for classes and extracurricular activities. Story 51. A girl I have gone to school with since kindergarten was recently arrested on a Canada-wide warrant for sexual offenses and possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material. She was always somewhat unpleasant, but I never expected her to be an actual monster. Story 52. My town is a massive city. One particularly bad incident that comes to mind is when I was standing in line for a burrito and looked up at the TV to see the mugshot of a very familiar face from elementary school, arrested for murder. The shock was that the person who did it was the son of my school's social worker, who was the absolute sweetest lady and raised him well. I never could have expected that of him, but he fell in with the wrong crowd and committed murder with them. Story 53. Murdered his ex-wife and a waiter, then died before identifying the real killer. Story 54. A beloved high school French teacher was grooming and engaging in a sexual relationship with a 15-year-old student. The teacher's wife also knew about it and had walked in on them multiple times. The student was placed in an institution for a year after a suicide attempt and then returned in the 12th grade. It is truly a sad situation all around. Story 55. The girl I grew up with was pretty shy but very sweet and gentle. She had very religious parents. After high school, she got pregnant but hid it while still living with them. She ended up having twins at home and must have had a mental breakdown. She either drowned or suffocated them both. She pleaded insanity, but it was not accepted, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Think she must have temporarily lost her mind because she really was such a sweet person. I went to church and Christian school with her, and her parents were probably the most conservative Christians there. I am sure that played into it. Maybe she thought that her entire family and social circle would disown her if they found out she got pregnant out of wedlock. It is tragic all around. Story 56. The high school music teacher was involved in an inappropriate relationship with one particular family, which had several daughters. Each daughter consistently earned first chair in the jazz band. If you know anything about the school music festival scene, you know this can lead to major scholarships. People become very competitive about it. Band politics are intense. I quit because of the constant drama, long before I realized that underage grooming was also part of the situation. Keep in mind, this was the mother initiating the grooming first. She was in a relationship with the band teacher. It escalated after I graduated. The father divorced the mother. The teacher's wife divorced him, and his own daughter, who was friends with my sister, stopped talking to him. I believe the youngest daughter avoided it. The others went on to earn very prestigious music scholarships. The teacher was not fired because our band was famous and he was considered legendary. He eventually quit. There were no charges, no jail time, just 3 or 4 girls left with severe trauma. This occurred in a well-known resort town in California. I switched to more enjoyable electives after I left band, with much better teachers. Additionally, our chemistry teacher inappropriately touched girls. Story 57. Just one? In my senior year, 4 of my teachers were fired for inappropriate relationships with students. They all left town and found teaching jobs in other states. Story 58. We were classmates. He was the sweetest boy everyone knew, an absolute social butterfly. He was on the autism spectrum, but everyone still loved and accepted him anyway. He remembered every name, greeted everyone when he saw us in the hallways, always had such a big smile and a skip in his walk. This guy was a complete ray of sunshine. Even one day when he was missing, the entire community got together to find him and make sure he got home safe. I left for 4 years to complete my degree, and when I came back, I learned from a friend who stayed that he got really into hard drugs. Shortly before graduation it started. Got so bad he didn't finish school. He's been in and out of prison now, struggling to stay clean. It's a shame. I really miss him, We'd have some of the coolest conversations about hypotheticals and the universe. He would have been an amazing writer. Story 59. It was not my hometown, but the first college I attended in the Midwest. It was a very conservative school. I had a literature professor who was really cool and very progressive. I got along with her because I was not from the Midwest, and she really liked my perspective. It was the only A that I received that year. She was an arsonist and was caught setting fires on campus. Story 60. A young man, a bit older than me, lived with his grandfather and grandmother. He was around 18 years old, and his grandfather allowed him to wash and tend to the car. He spent hours polishing it. In general, he was very quiet and kind, unlike other teenagers. One day, he met a lady and decided to take her to the seaside, but his grandfather refused to let him use the car. He then killed his grandfather and his grandmother as well so that she would not call the police. He left with his girlfriend in the car. About a week later, the neighbors noticed a foul smell. He was arrested and sentenced to approximately 15 years in prison. I have since moved, but I am terrified by the thought that he may be released and possibly living in his grandparents' apartment. Story 61. About 1,000,000 years ago, I went to a very evangelical church in our town. It had a big congregation with a strong emphasis on living the gospel. The local police had a crackdown on curb crawlers, men driving through the red light area to pick up prostitutes, and printed the names of those they arrested in the local paper. A very prominent member of the church, a high-powered lawyer, and his wife did not return after the first wave of names was published. Story 62. My pediatrician was well known in my town for the advances he advocated for in local health care. He practiced there for decades and was a funny, kind gentleman. He delivered my youngest brother and was supposed to deliver my sister's child. He was caught in a police sting trying to exploit a 5-year-old. My mom cried when she found out. My siblings and I literally grew up with him as our doctor. Story 63. I grew up in rural Ireland, and years later we found out the local Protestant pastor was a secret agent for the Irish Republican Army. Story 64. Not as shocking as most of the other cases people shared here, but it's different enough that I think it's still interesting. I grew up in a small village of less than 300 people, which means everyone knows each other. My mom worked at the bank with a woman who had a husband and 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Both kids were in the same school as me, a few grades below, and one of my classmates was their cousin and the niece of that couple. They often went to Mexico and made friends with an American man who eventually moved to the area. I live in Alberta, Canada. Everyone thought things were fine. A few years later, the father and son died in a car crash caused by bad winter conditions. Shortly after, the American man moved in with the widowed wife and they got married. Apparently, they had been having an affair for years, even before he moved to Canada. They had hooked up in Mexico. That was a bit of a shock. But that was not the end of the story. A few years later, the widow died in a car accident involving a collision with a moose. Now the only family left was the daughter, who lived with her American stepfather. Fast forward a few years. I had graduated from high school, but the daughter was still attending. Remember how I said my classmate was the cousin of this girl? The cousin's father, who was the girl's uncle, had been claiming his niece as a dependent on his tax returns for several years, stating she lived with them. He was a well-respected member of the community and ran a business selling fertilizer and other chemicals to local farmers. So he knew many people. Everything changed when a group of Canada Revenue Agency agents came to his door asking about the niece who was supposedly living with him. He was charged with tax fraud and fined heavily. That shocked a lot of people. Story 65. She was hit by a drunk driver. She was almost a vegetable, but she has been making a slow recovery. Story 66. High school history teacher and volleyball coach. It turned out he was having inappropriate relationships with underage girls. I disliked him for telling me I did not know how the atomic bomb was detonated over Hiroshima during my oral report. He mistakenly thought the atomic bomb was detonated by dropping it on the ground. Story 67. The deacon at my Roman Catholic elementary school stole $53,000 from our parish charity and then fled to Texas. Story 68. 2 separate incidents occurred at the same park. I played baseball at Mahoney Park in Hamilton, Ontario, and anyone who did in the 1990s is probably aware of what happened with the older man who looked after the park and organized the equipment daily. He was well liked until some kids made allegations that turned into charges, and he was removed from the park after that. He had been there for years, and it was big news in the area when it happened. I swear the park atmosphere changed after that and has never been the same since. Shortly after, a student from my school had a father who was the president of the park and managed the treasury. He was charged with embezzlement and had to pay back almost $100,000 to avoid jail. He went from neighborhood hero to villain instantly. Story 69. The famous to infamous Purple Wagon Man in Parma, Ohio. This was just before I moved there, so I only heard about him from other parents at the playgrounds. Story 70. At 16, she was babysitting and let the child put a metal fork in the microwave. She allowed him to do it so he would get in trouble. It destroyed the microwave and part of the house. I am pretty sure she did it herself on purpose and blamed the child. She is a teacher now. Story 71. A guy I knew from church and school, a typical quiet kid, was bullied for being a little overweight. He was a nice guy, but he got into hard drugs. The details are unclear, but he killed his mom in her house. He crashed out, moved in with her, and was arrested several times for breaking into his neighbors' houses to steal and sell items for drug money. It is really sad. He was genuinely a good, kind, soft-spoken person, but the drugs really ruined him. Story 72. A man who would go out of his way to help others in the area was found guilty of possessing thousands of child exploitation images over a 20-year period. I used to serve him often in the store where I worked. His elderly aunt would call to place an order, and he would collect it. I always had an odd feeling around him but could not figure out why. He seemed very nice. Now I know the reason. We were all disgusted. Story 73. In 1989 in Novato, California, Scott Williams, a gas station and convenience store manager, and a local church deacon and Sunday school teacher, was convicted of raping and murdering 13-year-old Jennifer Moore. Story 74. Long story short, there was a man people used to criticize for being a bit silly and innocent. Some people were very harsh with their insults towards him. Years later, he happened to be back in town for something. He is now a multimillionaire and drives an S-Class Mercedes. He left the town and started his own business. I looked it up since. The interesting thing is, he employs around 100 people. These are jobs the town could have had. But some people just had to make their jokes. Story 75. I was family friends with another family through sport. They moved away to another state, to a smaller town. I never knew why. He was older than me, and my sibling was friends with him. Later on in high school, it turned out he was a horror fan. He and a friend killed a classmate by turning off the power when the person was home alone and stabbed them around 30 times. Both are serving life in prison. They ended up moving out of the major city area because he was having problems, and the parents thought a smaller town would work out for him. Looking back, I think my sibling saved me once or twice from his psychotic breaks. Story 76. He committed suicide by police. He was 17 and experimenting with K2, which is considered low-quality cannabis by today's standards, and engaged with his former girlfriend's father, who was a local police chief, in order to bait police into a chase. I don't know why the confrontation occurred. He ended up driving the wrong way on the interstate as part of a high-speed chase and died when he crashed into a construction vehicle on the shoulder. Rest in peace, Charlie. You were the kindest upperclassman on the wrestling team when I was a bullied freshman. Story 77. A homeless woman who seemed harmless sat on the side of the road, holding protest signs against the mayor for reasons unknown. When the weather started getting colder, a man brought a blanket for her, and she thanked him by stabbing him in the throat, killing him. People often wonder why I avoid homeless individuals. Story 78. A special needs student I went to high school with was semi-famous in town for bringing a stereo and dancing at one of the busier intersections. He was generally well-liked, super down-to-earth, and friendly, always willing to chat or show someone how to dance for a few minutes. He would dance for hours at a time, multiple days a week. He was recently arrested for animal abuse. Story 79. He fell in love with a beautiful woman who had recently separated from her abusive husband. He supported her in the final steps of leaving what she described as a horror story. However, she was the abusive one. She ended up scapegoating him and using him as leverage to coerce her husband into giving her money before leaving town. She dragged both men through the mud and ruined their reputations through rumors and manipulation of their friends. She was a con artist and a horrible person. Story 80. A guy I went to school with came from a very Christian family. They were into the Bible and did not swear. Story 81. When I was in high school, there was a girl everyone called the Body because she had an amazing physique, like Sydney Sweeney level. She was very popular and was captain of the volleyball team. She was a grade below us and my friends. A few of my friends and I ended up going to college on the other side of the state, about 5 hours away. One day, my friends and I were standing outside our dorm room when the Body walked by, holding hands with the shop teacher and intermittently kissing him. We looked at each other and wondered, did we really just see that? It was so unexpected. Later, we learned there had been a high school volleyball competition, and she had told the team she would drive separately instead of taking the bus like the rest of them. They must have thought no one would see, given the distance and their separate travel. One of my friends was dating a girl back home who was a senior in the same class as the Body, so the news got out. The teacher was fired, and his life fell apart. He was married with kids, but his marriage ended, and his children wanted nothing to do with him. Story 82. A man I worked with a few years ago was in the news for kidnapping his ex-partner and their infant son and holding them hostage. While barricaded, he shot his son, who survived, then turned the gun on himself. Story 83. Two teenagers came upon a disabled woman washing her car at 2 a.m., kidnapped her, stole her car, and murdered her with a pocketknife. They drove around with the body until the police tried to stop the car. At that point, they fled, then abandoned the car and ran on foot. Police caught the criminals. The town was shocked. Story 84. A colonel who was the commander of an Air Force base and had previously been a pilot of the very important person transport that ferried the Prime Minister and other dignitaries was arrested and convicted as a serial rapist and murderer. Story 85, I guess 3. The first was a youth Sunday school teacher who worked in book sales. When his wife was pregnant, he had an affair with someone in the college-age and younger Sunday school class. It was never disclosed whether this person was a minor. He was asked to leave the church. It was apparently covered up well because he then got a volunteer position teaching kids until a couple of years later when they found out and asked him to leave. The second was an elementary school teacher at a highly regarded private school in my area. He taught kindergarten and used to touch the girls in class. I know this because one of my friends was in his class and was sexually assaulted. When she told her parents, they went to the principal. The principal said he was a well-regarded teacher and refused to fire him. The parents were somehow convinced by the teacher that pressing charges or removing their daughter would negatively impact her, so they never took action. He taught there until he retired. She was later sexually assaulted again when she was older and did not tell her parents because they had blamed the original incident in kindergarten on her. She was afraid the same would happen. I found out this story years later in college when my friend kept insisting she needed to have sex with some random person. I couldn't figure out why, until she explained she had never had sex on her own volition and described what had happened. I could never look her mother in the face again after hearing that she had allowed this to happen. There are many terrible people in this story, but the only innocent one was the kindergarten teacher. The third was a young Spanish teacher, a super nice guy who appeared completely normal and healthy. He didn't show up for class one Monday morning, not near a holiday. He was last seen the Friday before. Students researched, and apparently he was arrested on Monday in Miami for driving under the influence, although we weren't in Florida. He was released on bail. 3 days later, his death was announced, but the family would not release the cause. It was disclosed that he had a substance abuse problem. No one knows the full story, but clearly a lot was going on if a man randomly disappears, is found intoxicated, and dies under mysterious circumstances within a week while he was supposed to be teaching class. Story 86. There was a kid at my oldest son's school who seemed like a nice enough person. He came to a couple of birthday parties at our house back in the day. He raped and murdered a developmentally disabled teenage girl not long after graduating high school. Now he is in prison for life. I am still shocked. Story 87. We had a police officer who had multiple citations for bravery. He was arrested on child pornography charges and imprisoned. He then left the country, predictably, for Thailand. He later returned to look after his wife, who is seriously ill with a degenerative disease. It is a small town, so this behavior is quite audacious. Naturally, he retained his full pension. I do not understand how he has the audacity to walk down the street. Story 88. Some people attacked Nancy Kerrigan. Tanya Harding went to my high school. Another student and I interviewed her for the high school newspaper, although that was years before the attack. Story 89. A bookstore owner in my small mountain town is still using his position to groom and assault both young boys and girls. However, his friends include famous actors, celebrities, and New York Times intellectual writers who do not believe the low-income, non-intellectual victims he assaults. He preempts his victims by filing frivolous harassment claims in court, forcing them to spend money on legal defense instead of focusing on holding him accountable. He has been under investigation for felony child sexual grooming, but he intimidates victims into silence, preventing cases from moving forward. The police are aware, but without victims coming forward or being believed, he continues abusing children more than 15 years after arriving in our town. Whenever his business is promoted by national media or celebrity figures, I cringe. Good people unknowingly give him legitimacy. He uses classes and workshops at his store and organization to groom and recruit victims. Privileged individuals cannot believe he is a pedophile and rapist because he does not assault within their social class. It is unbelievable, yet no one intervenes. He continues traumatizing lives while his wealthy and influential friends celebrate him at dinner parties. The reason people like him and others such as Bill Cosby and Jeffrey Epstein avoid capture is not that no one knows, but that people tend to believe and support the perpetrator more than the unknown victims. This is a tale as old as time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.